more than.
Okay, hello and welcome to our Wednesday night live stream. I am your host, Dana Morningstar. So if you are new here, welcome. And if you are returning here, welcome. This is a live stream that I try to do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it goes for about 3 hours. It just kind of depends on the night. So like I said, if you're new here, welcome. Let's see if anybody starts hopping in the chat here. My internet has been really glitchy lately and super slow. So I hope that's not impacting the live stream tonight. Changing My Life is here and says hello. Hello, welcome. Speculator, Julia, Kenneth, Elizabeth. Hello, hello. How is everybody doing? Trez ID or Trezid, not sure which, says hello. Jamie and Kamami says bonsoir. Bonsoir, Kamami. Denitria, hello. Gil, Crystal. Life is a Journey, Colleen. Lots of different people hopping on from around the world tonight. Very cool. So it's been an interesting past, week at least, with coronavirus and everything else that's been going on. Scary stuff. I don't know how the rest of the world is kind of faring with that. I'm not sure how many cases they have in other parts of the world. I think there's less than 20 cases here in the US. At least that was the last I'd heard a few days ago. But I've heard talk that they're basically shutting down China for another week. I'm not sure if that's correct, but that's a big deal, and that's really scary stuff. And I just really hope that that they can get a handle on this sooner than later. Yeah, Meg from Australia. How is Australia doing? I saw a picture the other day about, I think it was firefighters who they had a lot of firefighters in Australia who were taking a break during their time from fighting the fires there, just cuddling, feeding, and holding a lot of the injured koalas because they need, they're injured. And so they needed to be bottle fed and held. And it was just the most heartwarming picture to see all of these really, big, strong guys holding these just darling little koala bears. And I'm sure they must be absolutely exhausted, working so hard day after day after day after day, trying to put these fires out. So I just, I don't know, just beyond tragic what's going on. Oh, I don't blame you. Changing My Life says, I'm doing okay. I had a meltdown because this narcissist had the nerve to claim the kids on his taxes without paying any child support, and I have full custody. He sees them for 1 hour a week, supervised, and he claimed them. Ay, ay, ay. Do you guys have anything? Is there like a divorce degree of any kind, or were you ever, I guess what was written down legally? Yeah, and I don't blame you for being outraged by that. I don't know what kind of rights you would have, or if it's just kind of whoever files first kind of a thing, but that's outrageous. Gil asks, hey, Dana, can you please talk about how I can stop being so angry regarding narcissistic abuse over 3 years? No longer together, not seen in a year, but a lot of contact over text. I just can't stay blocked. Um, well, that's a difficult one because the abuse is going to continue if if you keep that door open. And it's difficult to start the healing if the abuse is still continuing. So we tend, whenever we feel a certain way, good or positive or negative, I'll say, because I don't really think there's anything as like such a thing as bad feelings. I think we just have pleasant and unpleasant feelings. That when we label our feelings as bad or good, that judgment that we're assigning to them comes into play for other reasons. So, and the other reasons have to do with what kind of perception we have of the event, like what that means to us. So when we're feeling angry at something, it's because there's been a boundary crossed. And oftentimes we feel like we lost out, like something was taken. We feel violated in some way, shape, or form, generally, when we experience anger. And anger in itself it's a healthy emotion because it allows us to know when our boundaries have been crossed. So but all of our emotions, especially anger, it's designed for us to take action on. So anger is more of one of those fight emotions that's designed to say, hey, this isn't working for me. And then for you to do something different. And the reason that anger state is sticking around is because there's no action that's being taken to do anything different. And that's when things can become very difficult. And abuse is a complicated thing. It's difficult. I get it, to block a person and just drive on. There's so many other factors at work, but the anger can kind of help to, I guess, simmer that anger down or have it become more manageable when you can do something productive with it. So you're not feeling that something was taken from you. And a lot of this has to do with changing your perspective on a situation. And oftentimes when you change your perception of a situation, other things follow. So your thoughts follow, your emotions follow. And it makes taking a different action that much easier. So you could use the situation as, okay, I'm really angry at being treated this way. Okay, wait, let me just give you a personal example. This might be easier to understand what I'm trying to get at here. One of the things that helped me to release that anger was to squeeze out every lesson I possibly could from what happened to me and to make it work for my highest and greatest good and the highest and greatest good of other people. And then that way it wasn't simply this horrific violation. It was a catalyst for growth. And so when I changed the meaning that I was assigning to it, it was a way for me to take my power back. So it wasn't, and I had to make the decision, I'm not going to let this ruin my life. And I'm not going to let this person do any more damage. Like that's what, either they're intending to do that, intentionally doing that, or they're just so selfish that they don't even realize they're doing it. Either way, I've got things to do in this life and I'm not letting this fool slow me down. So, keep on, keep on walking, buddy. Like you just got to own it, own your power and be like, I get to decide what this means to me. I get to decide what to do with this. This doesn't have to be the end of your life. It can be a brand new beginning, and there's so much power in that anger too. That's something I don't think is rarely discussed. I think there's only a few times in a person's life where they have these places where the emotions are so intense, especially anger. It's so intense that it can truly function like rocket fuel. But if you don't give it a direction, it can be a lot like turning on a fire hose and then just not knowing what to do with it or how to turn it off. So give it a direction, make that declaration to yourself that you're going to use, that you're going to squeeze out every single lesson out of what has happened and is happening to you, and you're going to use it for your highest and greatest good. And eventually for the highest and greatest good of others, because that's just how these things work. Even if you don't go about it in direct ways, it's still for the highest and greatest good of others. It truly is. So does that help? Am I making myself clear? I don't know. Ah, okay. Gil says yes. Okay, thank you. That makes sense. It was all the cheating and the smear campaign. Yep. I would encourage you, Gil, start making a list of all of the positives that you are able to make out of this. You were able to find your worth as a person. You were able to realize that kind of who your true friends were. You were able to realize your inner strength, that you're stronger than you ever thought possible. Uh, I mean, thinking about all of the different positives that you were able to get from this, intentionally get. And that's you. That's 100% you. That has nothing to do with the other person. And that's really powerful. Okay, Kenneth just asked a question, and Jack, hey Jack, was saying, I hope Dana sees it. So let's see. Oh, that is a great question. Kenneth asks, do you think it's harder to recover from child abuse than relationship abuse? I think it's different. And the reason I say that is because child abuse happens during the formative years of a person. So the effects of child abuse tend to be significantly greater than the effects of relationship abuse, because our personality is largely formed, in childhood. So all of that, how we relate to other people, how our ability to attach, um, our understanding of what safety is, of what family is, of what love is, of what a parent is. All of these things are lessons that are learned in childhood. And those that have experienced abuse of any kind during childhood, it's its own level of traumatic, because it just really rocks a child's perception of themselves and of the world at large. So it's, um, and I think it's more difficult to see. The trauma can be so much more ingrained in a person's personality when they're younger. So it can take, and they often don't have much perspective, I guess. The house you grew up in is the house you grew up in, and most people don't realize, they just take that as like, this is normal, until they get older and they start having slumber parties, or maybe they're even in high school or college, or they're just away from home, and they see somebody else's family, and then they're shocked. Like, oh, I had no idea. I always thought the way we did it was just how it was done. I didn't realize that, people could argue with their parents and not get yelled at or not get hit, kind of a thing. So just different types, uh, different degrees of damage, I guess. Um, and that's not to minimize what a person goes through with relationship abuse later on in life. So, and there's just so many factors at work, but I would say by and like, just generalizing here, that would be the difference with childhood abuse. Whereas relationship abuse, a person has kind of their baseline level of functioning, of coping, of their personality, their ability to be resilient, these kinds of things, which those are all still forming in childhood. Relationship wise, it can still really rock a person's ability to trust, to love, to be able to form attachment to others. I mean, like I said, I don't want to minimize damage done in relationships because it can really rock a person. But the difference is between really like CPTSD and more of, I guess, what you could consider PTSD, depending on how you're defining PTSD. Some people define complex post-traumatic stress disorder as trauma that only occurs during childhood, whereas others view it as any long-term trauma that's occurring. I don't know. Both do significant amounts of damage. Both really, the person could benefit from significant therapy and working in healing. So there was a great book, Pete Walker. I don't know. We did this book for book club a long time ago. It was his book, CPTSD I think it's called From Surviving to Thriving. And it's fantastic. If you haven't read his stuff, he's written a couple books. I just highly recommend him. That guy is just so chock full of knowledge. He's one of my favorite speakers, authors, voices on this topic. And he's a longtime therapist. I just really, really like his work. I think he's very spot on. So, and he's also, I think, one of the few male voices in that speaks from personal experience in this field. So he grew up with a lot of child abuse, and so he's coming from that perspective of a male who's been abused as a child, as well as he's now a therapist. And that was one of the reasons he got into becoming a therapist. So I think it's just helpful to give the abuse experience more dimension, the more voices that speak on it. But his book, the CPTSD From Surviving to Thriving, he talks about kind of what healing looks like, the different things that we need to heal, the different responses that a person can get locked into, which is fascinating. That was the first time I'd ever heard personality disorders, or not just personality disorders, but what would you call that? I guess pathopsychology or psychopathology described like that. So just kind of abnormal psychology. So he refers to the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, and depending on kind of a combination of nature and nurture, how a person can default into one or two. We all have a primary one and a secondary one, and how those responses tend to play out in our life. We don't choose which response we default to. That really has to do with kind of what happened to us and our own personality. What I found really helpful with that was he just spelled it all out. And once you're able to see it in such a way, it's easier to identify these things within ourselves and to realize what areas, or to have at least a better understanding of different areas that could need work and need some more balance. So I highly recommend checking out that book. Okay, let's see here. Synth asks, how do I deal with feeling guilty about feeling like I should have done more to warn a friend who was dating a narcissist? She even knew he was trouble, but now he's recently moved in with her. Well, Synth, I guess what I have to say to that is, if she knew he was trouble, but he's recently moved in with her, there's nothing that you could have said, really, that would have changed her mind. She would have justified it anyhow, because she justified the rest of it. So all that would have done, had you said, no, this guy's nothing but trouble. He's a narcissist. He's verbally or emotionally abusive. He does this, he does that. She probably, well, more likely than not, if I was a betting man, this is what I would imagine would happen. She's going to go home and she's going to talk to him about it and say, Synth said that you did X, Y, and Z. And he's going to give his explanation for it. No, 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 no. I have that domestic violence charge because my boss hated me. I hardly even I didn't even touch my boss. My boss fell into a wall and then filed charges. Or, yeah, maybe I did really yell at my ex-girlfriend or my ex-wife, but it was because, man, she just was, was always on my back, or she would start fights or whatever. You have to realize that abusive people, especially narcissists, have a really skewed and warped view of reality. In their mind, they're always the victim. They're always the victim. And so they're always going to present their story from their side, which is they're the victim, they've been framed, they've been wronged, poor them. So no matter what you would have said, and it can be very convincing, right? If somebody's only giving you a half truth and the half of the truth that they're giving you backs up their position of painting them as a victim, you're going to believe that. So especially if the good times are really good, the sex is good, the connection's good, what have you, she's going to believe that. She'll have to find out on her own, unfortunately. But we can't. I wish we could. I wish we could drag people into the light, but it just does not work that way. Trying to do that, it annoys them and it frustrates us. And what happens is then she would be spending she would basically start distancing herself from you. She'd be spending significantly less time with you, and you would become part of the problem. So, okay. Let's see here. Let me scroll up. Laurette says, hi, Dana. Well, hi, Laurette. I don't think I've ever heard that name before. That is so fun to say. I really like your name, Laurette. Yes, I would agree. E-Rock mentions Jackson Mackenzie. Yes, I agree. I really enjoy his work as well. Synth mentions, he says, I've started rereading the Pete Walker book. I find I have to go through it slowly because it's quite triggering. Yes. And one of the things I would strongly encourage you guys too is to do exactly what Synth is talking about and reread these books. It's the weirdest thing because of what you get out of them now versus what you'll get out of them 6 months from now or a couple years from now are going to be totally different things. It's so wild because we don't read a book as the words on the page. We read it through the lens of who we are at that time. It's weird. Like if you were to go back and, you think about your favorite book when you were a child, and then you go back now and read it as an adult, it's a completely different book, completely different. The stuff that you pick up on or like or dislike about it's just very different. So that's interesting in general, but I think it's not talked about enough in terms of self-help. So many people will recommend, myself included, will recommend books, and that's great. We might only retain maybe 1 or 2% of what we read. So go back through. Audible is a great way to kind of painlessly integrate this practice into your life. There's tons of audiobooks out there, and you can listen to them when you're driving. So that's just something to consider. Okay, let me scroll up here. Truth Seeker says a lot of times we unknowingly attract our childhood abuser's psychological twin and don't realize it. Yes. And I would say we also unknowingly are attracted to. I think that's more significant because we really can't help who we attract. It's more about who's attracted, whoever is attracted to us is attracted to us. It's whether or not we're attracted to them and why, and how long we keep them in our life. So, sometimes abusive people can fly under the radar for a while. And, you know, we can't help that. Like, sometimes certain behaviors just take a little while to surface. Uh, it's more significant that how do we handle that kind of stuff when it does start to surface, if it starts to surface. Kenneth says, to me, childhood abuse can lead to being in abusive relationships. Yes, absolutely. I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but it's significant. And I think a lot of that has to do with uh, we tend to we tend to gravitate towards what's comfortable, not what's healthy. So if what's comfortable is and what's comfortable tends to be what's normal. So if a person grows up in a home where you have a really uh, let's use the word intense. You have a very intense parent, and that intensity comes across as intense amounts of love, and maybe that's not the right word. Intense amounts of attention and affection. Big birthday parties. You know, um, making you feel center stage and so loved and so important. But when the bad times are bad, that intensity is there too. If they start drinking, using drugs, becoming abusive, whatever it is that makes that switch flip. And, um, if you, when that abuse starts up, then that intensity is the abuse is bad. And so a person can very easily get caught up and thinking that intensity comes with love, that a person, um, that love is shown in these with grand apologies and extreme behavior and show me that you care. If you're willing to suffer for me, then you care. And want you to kind of fall on your knife for me. And it's that level of intensity. If any of you guys have been following the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard story and heard some of the videos or the recordings that have come out about her behavior, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And that's I think a really great example of a person who needs that level of intensity in order to feel loved. That's kind of not to diagnose or anything, but a lot of times that tends to be very classic um, borderline personality disorder type behavior. So it's like, I love you, I love you, I love you, but I need you to turn up the volume because I really need to really know that you love me. And so if we fight, it can't just be a disagreement that's settled. I need to know that you'll put up with anything from me, that you're not going to leave me, that if I um, act in whatever outrageous way, that you're going to put up with that because you love me. Your suffering shows me how much you love me. And of course, that's really dangerous and really just, it's not healthy. And that kind of stuff just escalates worse and worse and worse. So there's that part to it. And then there's also the other side where if a person grows up in a more, in type of traumatizing home, if they're really starved out for attention and affection, they're also going to be drawn to that level of intensity. The dozen phone calls a day and all of the flowery language and just the love bombing. Because if a person's been walking around feeling unloved and ignored for any length of time, they're going to just drink that right up. And it feels healthy at the time. And then they get really confused later on. This is why they have a hard time letting go later on too. Because it's like, well, man, the good times are so good, but damn, the bad times are really bad. They're lying, they're cheating, they're stealing, they're like they're doing whatever they want to do, and then they apologize when they get caught. Uh, and I take them back because if a person's focused on the good times and they're thinking that the good times is what's real, then they're just going to stay locked in confusion instead of realizing, no, the behavior when you're not looking, that's what's real. The good times is all of their false self. That's all of the charm. So when a person is entering into adulthood and they have all of these unaddressed vulnerabilities, and we all have some degree of unaddressed or even unexamined or unknown vulnerabilities, it's just part of being human. But if a person's experienced a significant amount of trauma, they're by and large going to have more and not realize it, because that's just been what's normal for them. And the way they've handled that trauma is also been what's normal for them. So if this is especially the case with addiction. So if a person's used to, man, okay, this is how I handle stress, I go shopping, or I drink, or whatever, they use drugs or whatever it might be, they're going to want another person that's going to be tolerant of that, and who's also probably going to want to look for somebody that isn't judging and is also engaging with them, because then it makes them feel like, oh, this is, it doesn't make them feel self-conscious. So that's when things can get really dangerous, because then next thing you know, oh, okay, now you've got two people with, um, you know, alcoholism or uh, chemical dependence in a relationship, on top of any I shouldn't say any other issues. I really believe there's always other issues when there's addiction present. It's not just alcoholism or just drugs. There's other stuff that's also unresolved. So, but this stuff isn't taught. That's the thing. And so we all kind of go through life like not very aware of these issues, these behaviors that are kind of running on autopilot, that's running us on autopilot, and until we crash and burn, until something happens. And I think that's why there's, people joke about midlife crisis. And I think for a lot of people, around the age of 40 is about their wake up time, where the pain becomes so great that they're like, man, I'm in the wrong relationship, in the wrong job, and I just need massive change in my life, because my life doesn't feel like it belongs to me. And that's when they really, make a lot of massive changes at once. It's just, we're not taught. That level of self-awareness isn't taught, to at least to the degree it needs to be. And um if there was more, here's my take on it. I think trauma is always going to be traumatizing, but I think the damage is going to be less severe if we can be more proactive about having these conversations. Like, not wait until somebody is so, you know, like battered by the storm, so to speak, that they can't handle it anymore, that they come crawling into therapy to start dealing with this stuff. I really feel like this just needs to be uh, common, popular conversation um, on a regular basis, starting at a young age. So I don't know. I hopefully that will be a thing that happens in the near future. Okay, so let me scroll down here. Yep, I agree. E-Rock says, yeah, it's like the messages that love hurts. In fact, the word love has been so perverted by feelings of obligation, um, of saying it to my parents. Right. Yeah, love doesn't hurt. It's the lack of love that hurts. It's the loss that hurts. Crystal asks, "Is there any way to cope with the guilt of reactive abuse?" Well, I think realizing that at any given time, all we can do is the best we any of us can do is the best we can at that time with the information and skills we have at that time. And when we know different, that's when we can start doing different. And it's I hear you. It's really painful, especially um, if there's if it's reactive abuse or if there's more of like the kind of unhealthy learned coping mechanisms, which we tend to call fleas that a person's picked up and especially if that kind of behavior comes out to people, uh, normal, decent people. That's that's difficult. Reactive abuse, when it comes, that tends to be, or not tends to be. Reactive abuse is when a person's being abused, they emotionally just get pushed and pushed and psychologically get pushed into a corner to where they eventually snap and then lash out. So it's basically a delayed self-protective response. That's what happens. So, um, you know, it it would've I mean, it's there's so many different factors at play when it comes to abuse, and the vast majority of time, people don't realize that what they're experiencing is abuse. They think it's just a, quote unquote "bad relationship." And, um, so I think pulling out as many of those lessons that you can, and as far as the guilt goes, um, reactive abuse is an extreme reaction, but it's an understandable reaction to abusive behavior. I'm not saying it's okay, but everybody has their point where they snap. And hopefully we can get to a place where we understand what's going on and what abuse is and that it will eventually lead to reactive abuse. I mean, a person can only take so much. Either that or they become so beat down psychologically that they stop trying. So, uh, you didn't. I'm guessing that you did the best that you could have at the time, and it was being reactively abusive. Here's my thing. I'm all for people protecting themselves. So, like, uh, I'm a big fan of it really bothers me. They have these different rules in school where if one kid fights back and defends themselves, that both kids get suspended. I really don't feel that people should be punished for defending themselves, um, in general, because what else are you gonna do? So, I mean, what else are you gonna do? And hopefully now that you're more aware of uh, kind of red flags of problematic behavior and you're more in tune with um, or your boundaries and standards are more in alignment and they're more balanced, that you won't be in a relationship that gets to that point again. So okay, let's see. um let me scroll here. Erock was talking about love and says, the saying and parents saying, I love you so much. And really, there was never any love. She's like, I just can't even handle this. I'm spiraling headfirst into the truth, and it's really hard to take. Yeah, it is. One of the things that helped me with that is realizing that everybody's capacity for love and attachment is different. And some people's, your 10%, what you might give 10% into something, that might be somebody else's 100%. And I'm not trying to excuse their behavior by any stretch, but when you see major differences like that, um, and you see it as more of a limitation, especially now through the eyes of an adult, looking back at this situation, because through the eyes of the child, when you're on the receiving end of it, it's so hurtful, and the child can spend decades trying to earn or win or get the love of their parent. And they internalize that. Their parents' rejection, they internalize as there must be something wrong with me. How come mom or dad won't spend time with me, won't bond with me, won't do any of these things, especially if they're doing that with the other kids, right? It can be really easy to internalize that, but it can be helpful as an adult to revisit that understanding of it and realize children aren't difficult to love. Like, they're really not. And if you've got a parent, there's a lot of people out there who just lack the emotional capacity to really bond with their children. And it's not the fault of their children. It's just that's their capacity. And it's tragic. It really, really is on many different levels, but it's not personal. But yes, it can be a lot to try to process. Okay, let's see. Let me scroll up here. Yes, Kat, you bring up a really great point. Kat says, refusal to tolerate toxic, abusive behavior can be perceived as wrong by people with unhealthy behavior and boundaries, as this prevents their unhealthy needs for being met. Yes, 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 yes. And so this is so important that we're not looking around at other people to figure out what we need to do. Because, yeah, it's like if you're in a cult and you think, hey, this is really off here. This person's saying that we need to drink Kool-Aid because we're going to go catch the tail of a comet, and, we're going to commit suicide to transcend out of our bodies to catch the tail of a comet to go to a different planet. I think I might be in a cult. Like, this is really out there. And then you ask the guy next to you, hey, do you think we're in a cult? Is this weird? Is this weird to you that we're talking about, poisoning ourselves to transcend our body to go to another planet? And the guy next to you is like, no, man, no, it's great. That guy's got it all figured out. Well, now you're right back in the thick of it again, because, we're seeking that validation from outside of ourselves. That's another reason it's so hard to get out of abusive relationships, because, like I was saying before, we tend to gravitate towards what's comfortable. And if dysfunction is what's comfortable because it's been what's normal, then we're going to get a bunch of really unhealthy advice. So, and even if you're around the most functional people, like, it's still really, really important that we're able to turn inward and to be able to validate ourselves. So knowing yourself well enough to know your reasons behind what you're doing or not doing. is absolutely key. That there's so much power in that, because when you get to that place, you don't need you don't need to take a vote on what to do with your life. And if you're coming from taking action from a place of, this is what's appropriate, this is what's inappropriate, this is where my boundaries are, this is where they end. These are my expectations for the behavior of other people, and this is, you're very clear on that. Then you can see when other people have really blurred, enmeshed, or just non-existent boundaries. And they're out there. Like, they are out there. They of every age, every religion, every gender, every profession. So it's really important that you are able to think for yourself and to know what's right for you and what's wrong for you and why. So you don't get knocked off course by that kind of stuff. Okay. Let's see here. Truth seeker is like, yeah, right. No, he's got the plan, man. He must look at all his followers. Give me the Kool-Aid and let's jet off to outer space. Yes. Yeah. I mean, no, that's the thing. Nobody thinks they'd ever join a cult, just like nobody thinks they'd ever be in an abusive relationship. And when nobody thinks they're in a cult, just like nobody thinks they're in an abusive relationship, until things get really problematic that they can no longer justify what's going on. And then at that point, they're like, yo, I think I need to leave. And that's when they start doing things differently. So it's really easy to lose our internal compass when somebody is really exploiting our vulnerabilities like that. So, okay. Let's, okay, hold on. Huffle is asking, Jack's narcissistic grandmother lost her second born to Rh disease. We think she decided that Jack was her do-over baby, and his narcissistic mom decided he had to be put in place. What do you mean by he had to be put in place? That he wasn't that special, or that, I guess I'm not clear on the dynamic that ensued. And then I guess my other question is, Jack, are you comfortable with us talking about this? E-Rock mentions that I engaged in reactive abuse and was raked over the coals for a year. And that's what happened, Dana, even if it was abuse. But I just started screaming, how can you be so evil? Yes. When a person abuse is not rational behavior. That's why it's so crazy making, because you're dealing with an adult who is not making any sense. And they have a completely skewed understanding of accountability, of responsibility, of adult behavior, of right and wrong, of entitlement, of all of it. And so that's why that kind of behavior is called crazy making, because it literally makes a person crazy, and it will push even the most Zen person to snapping. The big takeaway in this is to really make it your own standard, that you don't do crazy making in relation. You don't do crazy making, period. You don't do mental anguish, period. You don't do it. You have your reasons behind doing something, and you have your boundaries, and you have your standards, and you have your deal breakers. And if you can have those things be your North Star, then it'll help guide you out of the fog of all of that crazy making. It's when we get tangled up in it and we find ourselves trying to be rational with an irrational person, that you just get so damn frustrated because like, I don't understand how you don't understand. Like how you don't understand that it's not okay. It's not okay to cheat. It's not okay to lie. It's not okay to steal. It's not okay to be abusive, or um, you're expect to treat your children this way, or to treat the neighbor this way, or to treat me this way, or um, whatever. So yeah, it, it's the whole throwing pearls to swine kind of a thing. It's just, the ineffective communication isn't the issue here when you're dealing with a person with this degree of crazy making behavior. The issue is not that you need to somehow communicate more effectively. And that's where so many of us go wrong, because we're like, this person has to deep down know that what they're doing or saying is completely irrational. Like I just cannot comprehend how a grown adult can be going through life, driving a car, holding a job, and paying taxes, and think some of these thoughts. Like that does not compute. Like I don't understand how all of that fits inside one human being. And it's that when we just realize, when a person is so emotionally unaware and they're so manipulative and they think they're so clever, it's infuriating. It's just absolutely infuriating, especially when you've got um, proof. You're showing them stuff and they're still denying. It's like a little kid that's just lying to you. Like they've got frosting all over their face and you're like, did you eat the cupcake? No, I didn't eat the cupcake. Are you sure you didn't eat the cupcake? No, I didn't. God, why do you always think I'm lying? You've got frosting all over your face. Nuh-uh, I do not have frosting on my face. Yeah, you do. Here's a mirror. You have frosting on your face. Nuh-uh. Um, no, no, and then they start making up all these excuses. No, that was Susie. She put frosting on my face. And they'll throw all of these things at you to try to get you off track. It's just it's exhausting. It's exhausting and it's infuriating all at the same time. So, okay. Let me scroll down here. Huffle, I'm going to look for the okay, no, there it is. Second part of the follow-up here. Huffle says, okay, after the grandmother's second child had died, Jack's narcissistic mom was the only child. Then Jack was born. Oh, I see. Then Jack was born and he was the golden child. And then the mom, he was the golden child and then became the scapegoat to the mom for the mom at the same time. Wow. Well, that'll make your head spin. Jack, can you just let me know if you're okay with us discussing this? I'm going to scroll up here. He's okay. It sounds like you are. He says, I guess mom was first jealous that I would get the attention from her parents. And then she thought her mother was about to spoil me rotten and she couldn't have that. I see. That makes sense. So mom had been the only child and was probably on the receiving end of, because she was the only child of all of, their attention. And then Jack came along and it was, okay. Yeah. The son that they didn't have, basically spoiled by the grandmother. And then had the result was the mom was jealous of you. Wow. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Yes. You're fine with us talking about this. Okay, good. Just making sure. Let me reread the question here. I'm scrolling up here. Okay, so the original question was, kind of what are my thoughts about this? I guess my question would be, how does Jack feel like this impacted him? And being his spouse and seeing him, as from an outside perspective, how do you feel that this has impacted him? So these types of dynamics can go any number of ways. Uh, but everybody, it's the whole nature nurture kind of thing. Everybody, or combination of nature and nurture, I should say. So everybody handles these kinds of things differently. It's more about what kind of, um, coping methods. Yeah, what kind of coping methods does Jack have because of that? And in what ways has this impacted him with forming a relationship, forming attachment, with communication, with all of this? And those would be questions that I would encourage Jack to answer as well. I would actually encourage you both to write down a series of questions, to go back and write that down. How do you feel? What coping methods do you feel Jack has? And then Jack, to write down the same question. You both answer it on different sheets of paper and ask these questions. How do you feel like this has impacted you as far as relationships, with attachment in your marriage, so on and so on? Give each of you the same 10 or so questions, and then have a nice cup of tea and discuss it, because I know that you guys have the communication skills for that. So I think that would lead to some really interesting conversation there. Because it's really more about how a person's responding to what happened to them, more so than what happened to them. Because everybody's got something. Everybody goes through something, like there's that saying in Buddhism to kind of be kind because some people suffer too much, but also be kind because some people don't suffer enough. And it's very, very true. There's just a whole range out there, and it can affect people in a wide variety of ways. And all the rest of us could do is just to be kind, still have healthy boundaries, but be kind. Okay, so let me scroll down here. I wanted to add, people were talking about reactive abuse in the chat. Because the dynamics of abuse are so complex, and denial and minimization and justification and confusion and shame and guilt all go along with it. It can take a person decades before they've really realized that they've been abused, and to what extent. And this is where things can get really tricky, because reactive abuse can also be delayed. So it's not just that immediate response to, a kid's getting bullied in school. They are forced to take it. And then one day they snap and they just charge the other kid in the hallway. It can be decades later. A good example of this is, if you guys heard about the story, I think it was, I don't remember if it was the man who was being abused as a child, or if it was his father. I think it was the man who was being abused. He was being sexually abused by a priest for years and years and years, and ended up killing him in a really violent personal attack. And I think you could make a solid case that that was more reactive abuse, especially when there's sexual abuse involved, especially when a child is a child. Because there's a relationship that's there between the child and the predator. Even if it's not wanted by the child, it just creates a ton of confusion, and the child's minimizing it. They're thinking that they caused it, they deserved it, it was somehow their fault, they should have told somebody, they should have done something different. And they just try to suppress everything that happened, and then that stuff starts surfacing later on in life, and then it builds up, and then it becomes reactive. So there's just a lot to understanding abuse, and even I think psychology in general, we're just at the first wave of even beginning to understand trauma and how to help people heal that trauma response. Yes, Kat, and you bring up a great point. It says our society has black and white thinking. It defines people in one-dimensional ways. I am nurturing. I also assert my boundaries. Different situations require different responses. Yes. That's an interesting take on it, because I guess I tend to always see that in the opposite way, but you're spot on. Whereas people tend to think problematic people look a certain way, right? Like that it's the guy in the ski mask, or it's a guy in general, or it's the bad, like in the movies, the bad guys they generally look like bad guys, and or the bad women look like bad women. And that's not always the case. That's oftentimes not the case. The best hiding place for evil is behind good. So you have an interesting and an important twist to that, whereas people tend to think, okay, if this person they can either be nurturing or and accepting and compassionate, or they can have boundaries. And I think those of us that have, you know, um, been trying to get our own personality more in alignment have struggled with that, because society doesn't tend to see they tend to see these things as two separate things, when really I would say that both that the assertiveness and boundaries has to be there in order for a person to really truly be able to be an effective nurturer or effective at compassion or um, kind or anything else. Because if their ability to have functional boundaries is not present, then those acts really, I mean, if you think about it this way, they're really not sincere. That person's acting out of their own unresolved baggage. They're not being kind because they feel, oh, this is another human being, or this is an animal and I, should treat other living creatures with dignity and respect because they're alive. Like, they're not coming from that mindset. They're coming from, I'm going to be kind to all these people because I don't want them to leave me. I don't want confrontation. I don't want conflict. Their only skill, the way that they navigate life, is through their niceness. And uh, again, this is another uh, kind of personality trait that tends to really be out of alignment with borderline personality disorder. And it's that due to that fear of abandonment, um, where a person feels like, I don't want anybody to leave. And this is extreme. And this, I mean, this behavior is on a spectrum. So please don't, you know, I guess I'm just trying to make giving a more extreme example to just so you can see this behavior in motion. But it's the, I love you, like I hate you, but don't leave me kind of behavior. It's the push pull. It's the, um, I use niceness to pull people in, but they don't have, there's not that level. They're unable, they don't want to often rock the boat in an attempt to push people away. So they're not assertive. But then what happens is, then because they don't deal with things when they're small, or they don't address them when they're small, then it builds up and then they lash out. So it's that alternating between that fight response and that friend response. which would probably be the Pete Walker way of saying it. So it's these two very opposite responses that gives a person running hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold kind of a thing. And that's very volatile. Uh, so, but I think, like you said, Kat, in general, a lot of society doesn't understand. I think there's this large misunderstanding about what boundaries are. And I think a lot of, now that I'm saying this out loud, I think a lot of it has to do with, well, it's because assertive, different styles of communication's not taught. Like that would be a good start. But there seems to, especially, American culture, that level of bluntness, and I don't want to say bluntness, but tactful bluntness, being assertive, is really frowned upon, especially in certain parts of the country where people they don't have honest conversations. It's all small talk and it's all fluff. And then when that other person's gone, people just bitch and moan. It's one of the things I really liked about when I was overseas and in Europe. People were very straightforward. And I was like, oh man, this is so nice. Like uh, uh, you didn't have to wonder where their boundaries were or like what was appropriate or what wasn't. Like they just would come out and tell you. And, and they weren't, some people were rude about it, but more often than not, it was tactful. And that's just something that I think our culture really is lacking, that could benefit from more direct communication, because we do need boundaries in order to be appropriately nurturing. And if we're out of whack, if we're out of balance like that, and we're too nurturing, then that's a problem. And if we're too assertive, then we're on the line of being aggressive and domineering. That's a problem. That any imbalance in either direction is a problem. Jennifer says, yes, my boyfriend is Dutch and they are so straightforward over there. It's part of the reason I like him so much. Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense. Is, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. She's here almost every single week. She lives in China. Jack, help me out. Do you remember her name? I totally am drawing a blank. I can see her little picture of her face. I can. Xiao Yu, is that her name? I want to say it's Xiao Yu. If she pops into the chat anytime soon, you guys let me know, because I had told her we would discuss body dysmorphic disorder tonight. Yeah, Kat was saying, I agree. Yeah, kindness without boundaries can be harmful to self and motivated by low self-esteem and codependency, or harmful to others, for example, enabling. Yep. Yep, absolutely. I remember there was somebody I think it was in the forum, in the support group, who had made a comment about realizing that, like, oh my gosh, that was her way of getting through life, was through niceness. And just becoming more tolerant of others, of problematic situations, and because she didn't want to, it's the using niceness to navigate life kind of a thing. And her comment was something along the lines of realizing that what she thought was her personality was really a defense mechanism. And I thought, wow, that was such a profound way to put that, because it's so spot on. And then as survivors, realizing, oh my gosh, I need to really, who am I? And what is my personality going to look like when it starts getting more in balance? And I do start asserting myself. And I'm not relying on that defense mechanism. I mean, everything changes. Everything changes when we start getting more into alignment that way. Um, oh, I am going to say your name wrong. So I'm going to go with your last name because I think there's a better chance that I'm going to say that correctly. Um, Ahmed? Ahmed asks, how do we hurt narcissists? This is going to seem like a snarky answer, but I mean it with all sincerity. The way that you hurt them is that you move forward, and the best revenge is a great life. That you have a good life. That there's nothing that hurts a narcissist more than you having what they don't have. And I'm not just talking about material things or getting married or any of that stuff. I'm talking about inner happiness. They don't have that. Their life is so consumed with inadequacies and entitlement and all of these really low level feelings, um, that they just don't. Those higher level feelings of contentment and compassion and happiness and fulfillment, they're not there. So they don't have that. So they have to rely on more of like kind of these quick hit type feelings. You know, it's just I don't even know how to it's like lust and envy and greed and jealousy, and it's just bottom tier kind of stuff. There's nothing there at that. There's nothing of substance at that level. There really isn't. It's life starts being worth living when we get past all of that and um, step more into like self-actualization and fulfillment and contentment and these kinds of things. Now that's really difficult to do after abuse and when we are incredibly angry and we want to destroy another person because we feel that, no, maybe not even we feel that they've done a tremendous amount of damage to our lives. But you can start, I would encourage you to set your intention and to even maybe develop that as a mantra of, you know what, the best revenge is a good life. And to start getting clear on what that good life would look like to you or for you. Does it mean that you'd be more organized? Does it mean that you'd be fit? Does it mean that you would have certain hobbies or that you would, what kind of life, what would a good life look like for you? And then start working towards making that happen in small ways every single day. And then eventually you'll find that you've created that life for you. And the pain of this is kind of the silver lining to all of this. And I don't even know if that's the right way to look at it. If it's because it's a conscious decision that we have to make, that we're going to use what happened to us for our highest and greatest good and for the highest and greatest good of others. That's when we really become powerful and we can transform a really painful experience, because that pain, like I was talking about earlier in the live stream, it's like rocket fuel. You right now, if you can channel that anger into something positive, that's huge. That's life-changingly huge. So try to channel it as best as you can. It's okay to feel angry. It's appropriate to feel angry, but give it an outlet, so it doesn't that energy doesn't just bubble up and consume you and then just start seeping out of every pore to where you're lashing out at other people around you, and you feel so dysregulated that you're just not comfortable being around other people because you're so reactive. Oh, very cool. Well, thank you, Hooray, for the live stream donation. She says, Dana, you helped me so much 3 years ago when I was fresh out. It was a 22-year abusive marriage. Now I'm in school and interning as a case manager. I want to help others and pay it forward. Thank you so much. That is awesome. Congratulations. I always love it when people are able to take their pain and turn it into their power and use it for their highest and greatest good and use it for the highest and greatest good of other people. Because I'll tell you, it's it's those case managers, those social workers, those counselors, those people that are out in the trenches working with other people that have been through it that tend to make the best counselors and the best case managers and the best support because they get it. It's one of the things that so many people I think that are struggling. I think that's one of the benefits of NA and AA is it is so helpful to have a mentor that's been there, done that. You know, we don't have to just let whatever it is, abuse or addiction, consume us and then just pull us down to the depths of hell. We can use that as a stepping stone and we can really step into our power and affect tremendous amounts of change that we would never have been able to do otherwise. So good for you. I'm just thrilled to hear that. Okay, let's see here. Let me scroll up. Martzia asks, by the way, will you be starting the book club anytime soon? And also, I'm hoping that you'll update the podcasts. The podcasts should be going out every week. Can you tell me what channel, like what, I don't know, what is the term? Site, platform, app, I don't know, that you're listening to them on? Is it SoundCloud? Is it iTunes? Because if you're not getting at least one a week, then I need to check the feed connection because that should still be a thing. Um, and when will I be starting the book club? That is a good question. I'm going to say the last Thursday of this month, we'll resume book club. And we will start where we left off, which is, do I have the book here? Yes, I do, but I can't get to it. It's the Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine is the book that we'll be discussing. The last Thursday of this month, what is it, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let's see. Zachary, that's a great way to put that. He says, for me, living a good life is living within my values and virtues. I love that. Yeah. Yep. I love that. Let's see here. Oh, absolutely. That's a great way to describe it, Truth Seeker. She says, just knowledge about this will help people onto their feet. It's like emotional seasickness until you get free. Absolutely. Absolutely. When you don't know what's going on, it's the mental anguish and the confusion is awful. It's awful. It's the thickest fog a person can be in. And yes, having some sort of pinpoint of clarity, a starting point, and other people, and just to be validated that you're not crazy. Like you're not making a big deal out of nothing. And it's this is why I view these, how do I say this? This is why I view this time, I guess, in a person's life where they're in so much pain that they seek out information. They come across channels like mine, right? And they kind of wash up on our shores and they're just so broken and they're so lost and they're so confused and their life is so damaged and they're just at a point where they're just overwhelmed and they're in so much pain emotionally and every other way. It's it's such a transition place. It's where yes, this everything that they knew before, it's like a bomb went off, but then now it's also allowed for complete rebuilding. It to me, it's almost this like sacred space. It's like opening it there when my father died, and I'll have to see on his funeral, what do you call it, program, flyer, I don't, it's probably not called a flyer. The program, I guess I'll call it. There was a poem on it, and it's a really common poem. You could probably, I'll dig it up for next time, but it's about kind of death and rebirth. And it's referring to a literal death, how a person is when they die and they're passing on, they're going away in the ship, and there's people on the shore, and uh, they're on this side of things, and the person's going away on the ship, and it's like this goodbye. But then right when they get to that horizon, there's people on the other side of the shore that are saying, "Oh, look, there they are. There they are. Come on over. Come on over. We're so happy to see you." And I remember reading this poem and I thought, man, that is so appropriate when it comes to transitioning from survivor to thriver. It's exactly like that. Like there's all these other people on the other side of the shore, where it feels there's that moment where we just feel adrift at sea, and we've left the comfort of what was, and now we're transitioning. And then you start seeing hope when you realize, oh my gosh, no, there is actually another shore over there. I'm not just going out on a boat to the ocean and there's no wind. Like there is another port, and the more, so this is just such an opening for people. And, um, it's so powerful that the transformation that, like Hooray was talking about, that people, you know, um, not just live, but like bring forth out of themselves because of these experiences is just so cool. So I guess I just want everybody to know that it's so easy to get lost, and understandable to feel the weight of all of the pain and the heaviness, and to see all of the loss and the damage that's done. But there really is so much positive that can come from this, and this is the difference between standard resiliency and then a term called post-traumatic growth, which I'd love. Resiliency is when people talk about healing, it's that level of resiliency, going back to baseline of where they were before, bouncing back, so to speak. Well, the problem with that is, what if going back was never healthy to begin with? What if our baseline was never that functional to begin with? Which I would say is the case for the vast majority of people out there, whether they realize it or not, because this stuff's not taught. And it's not even if you live in a wonderful Norman Rockwell home, most people need to have this stuff really spelled out to them. Just because you observed your parents balancing their checkbook every month doesn't mean that you picked up on the fine points of personal finance, right? So just having certain skills role modeled without an explanation isn't going to, result in a person truly knowing what they're doing. So what am I saying? The point, I go off on these tangents. The point being is personal growth is growth that happens past the point of resiliency. It's past the point of bouncing back to normal. It's the what's next part. And that's where a person goes from, you go from who you were to victim to survivor, is back to that baseline, and then go up quite a few notches. That's thriver. And thriver is at a whole different level. It's when you examine your life, the broken pieces of your life, piece by piece, and consciously make the decision about what pieces you're going to be rebuilding with and why, and adding a lot of new pieces to it. So it's destruction that nobody wants to have in their life when things are blown apart like that. But it's oftentimes what's necessary in order for us to do something radically different. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah. Elizabeth says, that's beautiful. We start a new life after we mourned the one we thought we had. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And if we can realize that it's different, and because life is always about moving forward, it's never about moving backwards. So true healing, I think that's where everybody gets tripped up. True healing, resiliency only helps to a point. If our measuring stick for healing is who we were before, then we're using the wrong measuring stick. It's really helpful to just throw the stick out the window and then to start getting clear on, okay, what kind of life do you want to have in this next chapter of your life? It's going to be different, but that doesn't mean that it has to be worse. Doesn't mean that you have to, you know, suffer through. Your life can be even better than it was before. It's all about making different decisions on a regular basis. Different positive decisions, I should say. Uh, let's see here. Yeah, that's well said, Kenneth. He says, yep. Um, think of it as rebuilding instead of repairing. Yes. And Alice said, and, that's a really valid point, Alice. And she says, some of us aren't to that point yet. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And to those of you who are fresh out, this is a point, I think it can help to know that this point exists, that there is hope, that there is such a thing as post-traumatic growth, and that it can happen, and that it's a choice that we make to have that happen. I say this because when people start hearing terms like PTSD or CPTSD and they feel profoundly damaged, that can really create a spiral of feeling hopeless and getting caught up in those feelings of anger and sadness and bitterness and jadedness. Those feelings have a place and time in our life, and they're understandable and they're valid and they're important for us to feel them and to work through them. That's also a stage in healing. So I say all I was saying about post-traumatic growth, just so people know that that is possible. And I don't think that that's something that's discussed enough, um, that people know. Because I mean, I know for me, when I was going through everything, hearing from another survivor that she was able to take her life and radically transform it in positive ways, that was a first for me. I was like, "Really?" Because I just thought I'd have to live with being profoundly broken. Like, I had kinda made peace with going to therapy once a week for the rest of my life, and probably not ever getting in a relationship again, and, um, you know, like, having a lot of trust issues and anger issues and everything else, because that happened to me. Because I'm like, how do you move past that? Because you can't undo what happened to you, you know? So, like, I was stuck in this own kind of, mindset trap, and it was hearing that, "Oh, no, actually, a really awesome life is still possible." And it's possible because you can squeeze out lessons from all of this pain, and you can turn this pain into something positive. So, but yeah, everybody heals and moves forward in a different rate, and there's a wide mix of emotions that we all experience. Um, you know, it we don't just experience them once and then they're gone. It's constant. It's they resurface. They resurface and resurface and resurface, and often each time the well, I shouldn't say each time. More often than not, the intensity and duration is different, and with time and the more we process those feelings and allow ourselves to feel them and, um, to just kinda work through them, the intensity and duration is a lot less. Yeah, JJ says, "Yes, that's how I got targeted again and again until I'm dry. My baseline was still naive, and when I had positive vibrations again, boom, target again." Yeah, that's the like, there's so much to sort and sift through with all of this, and because this stuff's not taught, and it's so complex, and there's so many different factors at play, and problematic behavior can come across in a wide variety of ways. It's I would say it's impossible. It's impossible for a person to learn all the lessons they need to learn from just one relationship with, a really destructive person. And, uh, what I think we all tell ourselves, "Oh, this will never happen to me again." Um, and we'll learn some of the right lessons from that. We're like, "I am never gonna be with somebody who yells again or belittles me or invalidates my feelings." And if we stick to that, then we won't. But if that person has different types of behavior that's just as problematic, but in a different way, there's a solid chance it's gonna fly under our radar until it causes us enough pain that we jump ship. Um, or yeah, basically that's kind of what it boils down to. So that's a hard way to learn. That's a very traumatizing way to learn how to keep ourselves safe from all of this. So, um, yeah, it's it oftentimes takes, unfortunately, several well, I think I shouldn't say that. I think it takes, uh, discussion and application of lessons learned. It's like this knowledge isn't power, it's the application of knowledge that's power kind of a thing. Like, it's one thing to read about something or to watch YouTube videos or even to discuss it on a live stream chat. It's a whole other thing to actually go out into the real world and put these skills to use. And then you'll find how much like, where there's some kinda gaps in knowledge. And that goes for all of us. It's not just you. Right? Like, it's all of us out there. That's how we learn. So and then we do little things, different next time, and there's that continual improvement. So, um, yes, let's see here. Let me scroll down. Uh, let's see here. Elizabeth says, "Hey, we've got some great moderators over here." Yes, we do. Thank you guys, moderators that are here tonight. Y'all are wonderful and very much appreciated. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, let's see. Jennifer says, "I've been in therapy for 6 years and it feels like it will never end. I still feel like I'm at square one trying to jump to square two without any direction of where square two is." Okay. Well, that's concerning to me because it shouldn't therapy shouldn't go on indefinitely. And if you're feeling like you're still at square one and there's not clarity as to where square two is, and this has been 6 years, I would say it's definitely time to talk to your therapist about where square two is, and to revisit the initial goals that you set for therapy. So it's really because, boy, we can all go into therapy and psychoanalyze everything to pieces. Um, Therapy isn't it can be a place to vent and to just be heard. But, therapy, when it tends to be when it's more goal oriented, like what you're looking for, like I'm looking for square two, I'm not just looking to sit here and talk. Um, then it's helpful to get clear on having you define the goals that you're looking for. So picking 3 things, like what is bringing you into therapy and what are you hoping to get out of therapy? And then talking to your therapist about that and say, I think I just really want to revisit my goals. These are the 3 goals that I have picked out for the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks. You know, what do you think of them? Like, do you feel like these are reasonable? And then both of you kind of coming up with a direction together. So your therapist might have some ideas like, oh, you know what? I think that's actually really good. Or maybe that one's not clear enough. Maybe that one's too vague. Or maybe this one is just too big. Like, let's chunk that down and do a few smaller steps. That'll get you on track. So there really, I think, needs to be a track, and there needs to be uh, a time where there is a shift to where the person seeking therapy can then go start putting those skills to practice. Uh, so, yeah, if you're staying in therapy indefinitely for the same issue and there hasn't been any forward movement and you feel like you're just kind of following Moses through the desert, then it's time to take a time out and get clear on where the direction is and what the plan is. In my opinion, I really am a strong believer that helpful therapy has a termination date. So this isn't to say that you can't go back or restart it, but it's to say, okay, this is what I'm here for. These are some goals. Um, we're going to start moving forward. We're going to start focusing in on these 3 things. Then we'll either if you wanted to stay in therapy, and I guess if that was still considered therapeutic, to then reassess, okay, how are you doing meeting those goals? And kind of there's that forward momentum that you're discussing with your therapist. Okay. Um, let's see here. Let's see. Kenneth is saying, some therapists don't understand or are unhelpful. My old therapist told me it wasn't smart of me to quit football when I quit because my uncle forced me to play and threatened me if I told anyone. Yeah. You know, and yeah, sometimes uh, therapists are people too. And there's helpful ones and then there's unhelpful ones. And even um, kind of more extreme stuff aside, like that's, that kind of 2 cents isn't really helpful. But um, assuming that you have a therapist that you do feel uh, safe with and that you do feel heard and that you do feel um, that there is that relationship there. I think it's important to realize it's a relationship, and for any relationship to work there has to be communication, like solutions oriented, open, honest communication. So it really helps your therapist out too if you can go in there and say, these are some of uh, my concerns, or um, I just being I was wondering if we could kind of revisit my earlier goals, or because here's the thing is, it's therapy, it can really be a lot like diffusing. Working with another person can be a lot like diffusing a bomb, and except you don't know when that bomb goes off. That's is the most stressful thing. So you might say something to somebody and you think, "Oh boy, that's," you're well intended and that's really going to resonate with them, or like you might think that it's going to land a certain way and then it doesn't at all. And hopefully they'll say something. But I think everybody that I've ever met, frankly, myself included, has had a bad experience, at least one, in therapy. And um, that's incredibly stressful for a therapist. For most therapists, I think good therapists think about that. Of boy, I really that the intention is to help. It's not to further damage your clients. So letting them know, um, having that communication, or checking in and just saying, "Hey, this is what's working, this isn't working, and why," can help. It can help them too. So I don't know, I think it's important to be able to. It's like running a three-legged race, for them to be able to help you get the skills you need. They're going to need to know like what's working and what's not working. Okay. That's a good way to put it, Kenneth. He says, yeah, this taught me that you have to go to the right therapist for your issues, just like you wouldn't see a podiatrist because you get a migraine. Right. The unfortunate thing, therapists, finding a good therapist in a way is a lot like finding a good realtor, because there's so much kind of behind the scenes that the client doesn't see. And so so people tend to think like, oh, a therapist is a therapist, and they pick a therapist based on who their insurance, who takes their insurance. That's how people pick a therapist. And with a realtor, it's even, you know, it might be word of mouth, which is a really great way to do it, but it might just simply be, oh, because you got a flyer in the mail from somebody, or because that person looks, I don't know, looks a certain way, or sold the house next door to you, or what have you, and you don't know if they're good or bad, and you might not ever know really if they're good or bad. That's the problem. Is there can be damage done and the person just doesn't know for a long time. So uh, it's it's challenging. I really wish there was a better way, especially with therapy, because there's a lot more on the line than selling or buying a house. And not to minimize that, selling and buying a house is probably the most important, one of the most important purchases a person will make. But we're talking your emotional health here. It's and testimonials on a website are great, but of course those are all cherry picked, right? So like it's not that helpful. Uh, this is where I think reviews really come in handy, and reading a wide variety of people's experiences. I wish there was more of that for different types of professionals so people could know, especially with therapy, because it really is easy, um, easy to get tangled up. Easy, not even tangled up. I mean, it's hard to find a good fit, and to feel comfortable with somebody and who has the experience and that can actually help. Like I said, I think the healing community is just on just that first wave of truly, not even truly understanding. we're just at the starting line when it comes to understanding trauma and how to help people process it. It's just such a new field, such a new field. Okay, Jennifer was saying, well, it seems like I just go to therapy every other week and I sit there and she asks how I'm doing and I sort of don't really know what to say. So I'm like, oh, I'm doing okay. And then I feel like I have to snowball into any problems I've had in the past few weeks. So, like this past time was lack of assertiveness with my neighbor and my sister and a bad customer at work. And then she analyzes how best to deal with those people. And that's that. And it just repeats every 2 weeks. Okay. Well, it it just sounds kind of like there's a lack of um it sounds like you're not happy with the direction that it's going and there might not really be a direction there. So, I would encourage you to spend some time and to think about what you're hoping specifically to get clarity. What are you hoping to get out of your time in therapy? Is it to learn assertiveness skills? Is it um, that you want your anxiety to go from an 8 on a scale of 0 to 10 down to a 5 more often than not, like, more often than not, or that you're wanting, um, uh, do you see what I'm saying? Like specifics like that. Um, the more and then letting your therapist know, I really feel like I'd like to work on this because if you're going in there and she's asking you kind of how's it going, what's going on, you're like, oh, everything's fine, but and I get it. Then you're feeling, well, I don't really know what to discuss because I don't feel like there's a direction, and then you're just kind of bringing up stuff that you feel like maybe I should be bringing this up, but then there's still no direction. Um, it might be helpful for both of you to next time you go in, if she says, "Well, okay, how are you doing? How has your week been?" To say, "You know what? I've been thinking that uh, I'm that I need to get some more clarity about the my purpose and direction in therapy, and I feel like I've been kind of um, exactly what you just said. That I come in here and I say that I'm okay, and then I kind of talk about random things, and uh, I don't know if it's as structured um, as what I'm needing." And then see what your therapist says. And then asking, could we set some goals? What do you recommend? Like, could we set some goals? Could we revisit? Uh, could we focus on certain skills? What areas do you think that I could benefit? As an outside person, what area that's known you for 6 years? What areas does she feel that would be worth spending the next 6 weeks on? And see if you agree with that. And if you do, no, then there you go. Then if you don't, then go with something different. Yes, and Kat says, Jennifer, writing a list of questions and points to raise to take into your next session can be helpful. Yes, absolutely. It it really, really can be. And letting your therapist know, gosh, when we were talking about these certain topics or in the this is what's been working for me. I really like it when you give me some homework or a writing exercise or um, when you ask me, I don't know, these certain types of questions. This has really been helpful for me. Could we do more of that? Or I found that I tend to get really off track if I'm just left to just talk. And I don't feel like I'm getting that much out of it. Could we do something that's more structured? And see. But I think just like what Kat's saying, and I think a lot of people tend, there is not structure given. So people don't know what to expect with therapy and they don't know what to do. And so I think a lot of people just think, well, okay, they're not going to spend any time outside of that therapy session thinking about or preparing for or planning or anything for that session. That they'll just kind of go into the office on that day and then just start talking. And that the therapist is gonna somehow, um, I don't know, like, work with all of that. And there, there is a time and place for just kind of free form discussion, but it really does help if it's more tailored because it's really easy, uh for a person just to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and then we're not getting anywhere. And then even worse, the unintended negative consequence of that is then we start using therapy as a place for venting. And the problem with venting without action is it becomes a crutch. So it feels really productive. It feels like we're really, oh, this is such great self-care. I go into therapy and I just express all my feelings, but then I do nothing to change. Because then it's just venting and we leave feeling great about ourselves, but we're not actually changing things because it was just enough for us to talk about it. So the action part of therapy is where the magic happens. And it can be difficult. Again, I think most people, myself included, for a long time had this idea that um, the therapist is that mental health is just kind of this mystical thing and it just kind of happens. And it's easy to give this other person a lot of um, credit and power and, um, just thinking that they really know that they know best, basically, because they're the therapist and we're the client. And instead of seeing it as more of it's a relationship and it requires that openness on both sides and that trust to be there. And it requires checking in to see how each person, how it's working for both people, and then to make subtle shifts along the way. So, you know, yeah, I don't think you're the only one. I think your experience, Jennifer, with that, with therapy is probably more the norm than it is the exception. And this isn't to say that your therapist is a bad therapist or anything like that. It's just easy for therapy to slide into becoming um, a more free form, kind of directionless session like that. Okay. Here's something else, Jennifer, too, because that you can start doing immediately is, and I would encourage anybody that's in therapy to do this, no matter how wonderful or even awful your therapist is, if you're going to them to do this, because so much ground tends to be covered in a therapy session. And when things are brought up, it can be very difficult. I guess what I'm saying is it can be very difficult to look back and think and to see the insights and aha moments and changes that we have had occur. And so what can help with that is at the end of each session, either asking your therapist, uh, and this can be an exercise that you guys do between the two of you, if you and your therapist are open to this, or you can just write this down on a piece of paper and kind of just keep this as your own private journal. But asking yourself or asking you and your therapist, what really resonated with you today? Like, what was something that was a takeaway moment for you, and why? And the reason I would encourage you to bring this up in a session is it's really interesting, because odds are you both will have two very different things that stuck out as significant. And it can be really helpful hearing from another person what they found in that hour time to be significant, and why. So it helps to better, I think, like, wrap up the session, and then you have a more concrete takeaway of what was gleaned from your time there. So if that's something that you're doing with your if you're comfortable with your therapist, comfortable bringing that idea into therapy, I would encourage that. If you're not, writing that down, and then you can date. I would encourage you dating it, putting today's date or that day's date, that takeaway, and why this was so profound for you, or why this was significant for you, and then keeping this in a book. Maybe you just label it "My Takeaways," and then you go back every couple months and you reread it. And that way you can really see your growth over that time. It's really cool, because it's amazing how quickly an aha moment just becomes what we feel is now common sense. It's quick, like sometimes within a few hours. A lot of these insights can be lost because that we just absorb them. Kind of says, "Thank you, Dana. I will do that after my next session." Well, cool. I hope that is something that works well for you. Yeah, Jennifer says, "Yeah, that's a great idea, because it'll help reiterate important points." Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing, what like I said, it's amazing the difference when there's two. It's so weird, because you'll sit there and you're thinking, "Man," um, being on, like, the counseling side of the table, I'm like, "Man, I know exactly like what's gonna be their significant takeaway." And then the person says something totally different, and it just bowls me over. I'm like, "Really? I would not have ever guessed that in a million years, like, that was the significant takeaway." And so, as on the counseling side of the table, it's a great way to continually, like, assess, um, where the client is. And just to hear their insights about something, because it's, just the whole lesson there is, just don't assume what's going on with other people, because you just don't know all the time. You only know to a certain extent. Uh, okay, let me. Jennifer was saying, yeah. And she says, "And now part of it too, because this is ironically one of my problems, is that I feel badly for bringing this up to her, because I feel like she's the professional, and who am I to dictate to her? But I totally want more structure in my healing." I, again, I think that the way you're feeling of, well, gosh, she's the professional and I'm the one seeking services, and who am I to say what, to quote unquote dictate anything. I think that is, again, a really, really common feeling for people that are, that therapy, they're not getting what they're wanting out of therapy. And this is where it goes back to, it's a relationship, and effective relationships require effective communication, not dictating for either person to be dictating, right? So, uh, to tell her exactly, well, and maybe not exactly if you're not comfortable with it, but you can make suggestions And it helps to couch things in a way of, I thought when you come into our office and you sit down and she says, well, how are you doing today? Instead of saying fine, and then kind of scanning your memory for anything that you think is, worth talking about, a difficult customer, an issue with your boyfriend, whatever, going in there with some notes that you've jotted down and saying, you know what, I've been doing a lot of thinking about my time here. And um, here has what's been helpful for me. And here's where, and I'm nervous to even have this conversation. So this is an exercise in me being assertive. And I'm hoping that you can help if we were to take things in a slightly different direction. So do you see how I'm phrasing that, where it's not feeling like you're dictating anything and it's not feeling that you're attacking her? It's a very tactful, solutions-oriented approach. And you're saying, "Hey, this is a little I hope I'm not overstepping my boundaries. I understand that you're the professional here and that I'm the client." Um, and basically, here's what we've done so far that's really been helpful. And here's what I think if we could shift things just a little bit, here's what I'm thinking would be even more helpful if we could do X, Y, and Z. If we could maybe, if you could help me come up with some goals, maybe 3 goals for the next 6 weeks, something that I can really focus on. I think that'll just really help me to be clear on observing my behavior and my interactions with other people and whatnot. And then to say, I think it would really help me as well if we could come up with, if I could bounce this off of you, if I bounce these goals off of you, and if we could, whatever, like if we could explore different communication tech, being assertive or setting boundaries or whatnot, and if I could get some more feedback um, from you, or even just asking about a process for healing, like what does healing look like for her, and what recommendations, or what does she think would be an important next step for you, or where does she feel that uh, there's an area that there's some like that there needs to be more time spent, and getting her input. So it's not dictating, it's not demanding, it's not anything other than wanting to have it be more of a collaborative effort. Yeah, I agree. Kat was saying, I used to do a contract with my clients when I was a social worker to make our work together clear and accountable and outlined, what needs to be addressed and how, and maybe you could do this. Yes, I would agree. It helps everybody involved in the process to stay on a path uh, like that. And I love the idea. I'm gonna run with that, Kat. That's great. I like the idea of really making an outlined plan and having a contract, and maybe even giving them a copy. So it's just more, it's the more structured, the better. And that's another, you're spot on with that, Kat. She says, a good therapist would view your suggestions as proactive and not confrontational. Yes, I would agree with that completely. Uh, let's see. Let me scroll up here. Jennifer is saying, yes, to almost make it an exercise in assertiveness. Well, that's exactly what this would be. And boy, if there's ever a time to practice assertiveness, it would be with your therapist. So And this might be something that you want to kind of rehearse ahead of time. It helps. It really does help. It's amazing how much that helps. So then you don't get in there and either panic and say nothing, or uh, go the opposite end and become more aggressive and more dictating and demanding and all of that. Because that's, and we've talked about this before, but that going to that end, where when people struggle with assertiveness, because again, this isn't taught. So I think we all struggle with it because it's just not a life skill that is taught in school. And boy, I wish it was. For those of us that are more on the passive, uh, you know, using niceness to kind of navigate through life, when we're more on that side of the spectrum, we tend to, and we're learning about being assertive. One of the steps in that process, it's finding your sea legs with your communication style. It takes practice, and practice is awkward. Like it always involves stumbling and falling, right? So most people, when they're practicing a new skill, you're not going to do it right. You're not going to, I shouldn't say right. You're not going to do it perfectly right out of the bat, right off the bat. So you're going to most likely it can go from either being passive to aggressive, because it's difficult. It's wild how difficult it can be to be assertive, because to moderate that fight reflex to where we're being self-protective in the sense that we're standing up for our wants and needs in a tactful way is really difficult. It really, really difficult. And it's almost, and I think, many ways it's easier for passive people to go to the extreme and to lash out. And oftentimes when they're in that learning stage, it's easy to confuse um, aggression for assertiveness. I see this all the time. I've experienced it too. Like, oh, I really let that person have it. I really stood my ground. I said X, Y, and Z, and um, blah blah blah. I cussed them out good, and I really, kind of pitched a fit. And that is that extreme side where it's sort of like I think deep down there's this concern of, if I'm tactful, then I'm not going to be heard, or if I really am speak if I'm looking if I'm very if I'm open and honest and being solutions oriented, that makes me really vulnerable, because I'm putting my true feelings out there, and that's difficult to do at first. It really is. We feel very exposed. What if this person doesn't like that? What if they say something harsh? What if they shoot me down? What if they don't handle that well? And then that is its own skill, learning skill. But then learning how to separate hurt feelings from our self-worth. So if our defenses are down, we're able to be assertive, and we're not taking responsibility of the other person's response. We know I'm stating what my wants and needs are in a tactful way, tactful, solutions oriented way. They're not responding to it. They're getting defensive. That's on them. Like, you've done your part with asserting yourself. That's on them. And to not internalize that takes practice too. But once you kind of get those skills down, once you see it for what it is, you see it for what it is. And then it's a lot easier, because then we're not feeling so responsible for how everybody else feels about our boundaries. And that's a wonderful thing. Well, okay, so Jennifer says, my boyfriend understands it's hard for me to be assertive, but he can't wrap his mind around it because he himself is an assertive person. And for me, it's the opposite. I can't wrap my mind around assertiveness. Yes, I think that goes for anybody, right? When anybody has a different mindset or way of being, it's just so foreign to us. We're like, how on earth can they be so organized? Or how on earth can they be so disciplined to go to the gym like my brother? How does this happen? Like, we grew up together and he's, Mr. Fitness. It's just so different from where we are with our own habits, our own ways of being. And I think maybe that's the key, is looking at your behavior as a habit. And so once we make those shifts in thinking, and we start practicing and implementing a new habit, it eventually takes over, and it becomes more ingrained. And then it just becomes, that's when that change happens. Then it's like, oh, well, because I will tell you, well, it's like any positive change that you make. If you go from being really messy to being organized, at first, when you're really messy, you think, oh my gosh, I could, how do these people do it? How do they have 3 kids and their house just is so organized? How is this a thing? But then you start learning the skills required in order to have an organized house. And then you get to that place where then you're like, oh my gosh, how are they so messy? That it just becomes such a foreign way of life to you. It's the same thing with assertiveness. At first, it seems really difficult and it's awkward, and there's a lot of trial and error, like learning anything else. And then there does come a point where you realize, how did I ever do anything different? How on earth? Why was this so hard for me? Because it just becomes your normal way of being. More often than not. I mean, you'll still have times where, here's an example of something that happened to me today where I wasn't assertive and I should have been. I went to get my passport photo taken, and the guy took 2 pictures. I knew they weren't going to be good because I could just tell. And it's not, you know, you just know. Like, I think I had my eyes closed. I think I was looking weird. It just wasn't good. And instead of being assertive and just asking the guy, hey, do you mind if I see the pictures before you print them out? Um, I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be difficult. Right? And sure enough, he prints them out and he gives them to me, and they're awful. Like, they're so bad. And I was upset about that when I left. And I was like, Dana, gosh, why didn't you just speak up? You saw this train coming down the track. When, if a person's only taken 2 pictures, and when you're in the middle of a blink or something else, that it's not going to turn out. I guess I felt like I was being vain. And yeah, superficial or something. Anyways, but I'm getting the pictures retaken tomorrow, and I'm going to go pay for them and have them done at a different place tomorrow. So, lesson learned for me, you just got to speak up. You just got to speak up, and it probably wouldn't have been any big deal. And who cares if the guy thought I was being vain because I wanted to make sure, my passport picture was a decent picture. Who cares what he thinks? I'm the one that has to live with that passport for the next 10 years and show it every time I get on a plane. So the point is, it's a work in progress, and there's going to be times where we find ourselves being assertive more effortlessly in certain areas with certain people. And then there's times where it's really going to be a struggle. And then there's going to be times where it doesn't even cross our mind at the time. And then afterwards, we're kicking ourselves for it. But it's just learning something new. And I guess I also want to say, it's important for us to not kick ourselves for it. This is where kind of grace and compassion come into play. to just realize, hey, we're not going to just do it perfectly right off the bat. It's a continual process full of lessons. Life would be so boring if there weren't lessons, if we just had it all figured out. It really would. Okay, let's see. Let me scroll. Yeah, okay, Jennifer too. She says, I think assertiveness will be easier with new people in my life. But when it comes to people like my sister, who's been there my whole life, she just knows how to manipulate me. Yes. And that's what's challenging is practicing, especially being assertive, changing the dynamic with people that have known you forever, especially family, because it's all of a sudden it's like you're doing a dance and then they're used to it being one way and then you start doing something totally different and they don't know how to handle that. This is all subconscious and they want it to go back to what was comfortable, which was the old dynamic. And it can be really difficult to hold your ground with that. So, I think it was Eckhart Tolle in his book, The Power of Now. He was talking about that. He's like, it's easy to think that we're so enlightened and like have it all figured out or have a lot of it figured out. He's like, but the best test, so he said something along the lines, the best test is to go back and be around family. And I thought that's so true. It's amazing how much unresolved stuff that you didn't even know was there surfaces when we're around people where there's all kinds of water under that bridge and they know how to push buttons and we're so used to being triggered in a certain way. And it's if you can get some emotional distance from that and view it as from a place of curiosity of, oh my gosh, that really upset me. I wonder what that's about. It's easier, or it's not easier. It can be, those experiences can also be used as lessons. So, yeah. Let's see here. Kenneth says, I must go. I hope I contributed to the conversation tonight. Good night. You did, Kenneth. Thank you so much for your questions and your insight. They were fantastic as usual. Elizabeth says, there's not a single time in which I wasn't freed and relieved after leaving a guy. It makes me wonder if I shouldn't try to date at all. If that's the case, Elizabeth, then there's some other stuff going on, and odds are it's probably going on in other areas of your life as well, but maybe not to this degree. So, it's it's probably not a bad idea to kind of bench yourself and take a break from dating so you can take that time to turn inward and examine some of this stuff. Um, as far as like boundaries, standards, deal breakers, unexamined vulnerabilities, um, a great way, because just taking a break from dating, it's isn't going to do anything. It's what you do with that time that makes the difference. So one of the things one of the exercises I would encourage you to do is to write down, let's say the last um, 5 people. I don't know how many people you've dated in your life. Let's say the last 5 people or significant relationships you've had, and to write down what attracted you to this person and then what problematic behavior this person had. Why were you relieved when this relationship ended? And then see if there's any patterns there, because odds are there are. There's patterns of what pulls you in, like what attracts you to this person and then what keeps you there and how things start to get off balance. And if you can go back too with each of those relationships and not just um, people that you've dated, but also friends. I would say any type of um, relationship that's gone south, significant relationship, friendship, significant other, to do this, to write down what was how did this relationship start up and when did it start to go south? Or when do you remember noticing that it started to go south? What were they doing and how did you handle that? Or how did you respond to it and why? So that can kind of start the process of gathering up some insight as to what's going on. That's the hardest thing with all of this is, is so much of the stuff is subconscious. Like we're not aware of it. So then, like we're just kind of fumbling around hoping to stumble across an aha moment. And that's frustrating. But uh, seeing patterns, looking for patterns in your behavior. Um, I'll tell you something that I've seen a lot of people and I've done myself is when a person, if you're finding that you've had a series of problematic people in your life, um, to see, is it been the same types of problematic people or are they different? Um, if they're different, so let's say, for example, you go from one person who is really blunt and straightforward, rude, really rude, maybe even, yells or uh, just more aggressive. And then the next person is charming and nice and sweet, but then you find out that they lie and cheat and do all these things. If you're going back and forth between these two very different types of personalities, and I see a lot of survivors do this, what tends to happen is if a person is hurt in one way, they understandably try to avoid that. I'm never going to date that again. And so if they date a real jerk, then if they go to the person who's opposite of that, which normally is the prince or princess charming, thinking that's safe. But in reality, that's charm. And that person's, you know, just schmoozing you. So it's extremes. And then, but they don't connect that at the time. And then if a person gets tangled up with a real charming, dangerous person, pathological liar, cheater, you name it, then they're really freaked out because they're like, well, now how do I keep myself safe? It's easy to know to avoid the jerks of the world, but what do you do when Prince or Princess Charming is causes you a lot of pain? And then they're lost. But what tends to happen is then they find more safety in the people that are more jerks, that have that more overt jerky behavior. And I think the thinking subconsciously is, I feel more emotionally safe with the jerk because it's the difference between the snake in the road and the snake in the grass. At least with the jerk, I know what I'm getting. The snake in the grass is the worst kind of pain because you just don't see it coming. So that's a pattern. I don't know if that applies to you, but that's something to explore. What also gets a lot of people tangled up is, I'm all for psychoanalysis, but there's a point where uh, I don't, I think it does more harm than good. And when it comes to examining people that we're picking and even talking about like subconscious behavior and stuff, again, this can seem like so, I don't know, like so mystical, and it can make us paranoid because then we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know how to keep ourselves safe. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, I guess what I'm saying is it's easy to link up or to find reasons for things that sound like they could be accurate, but they're not. So it could be, and only you will really know, I think, at the end of the day, if those reasons are in fact accurate. But it sounds so convincing. Like it can be really easy to say, oh, you know, my, I don't know, my father was abusive, and that's why I date. That's why I date. I'm now married to this abusive man. You know, well, maybe that could be it. But there's a lot of people out there that are like, no, I really, my partner is abusive in very different ways. And had I known that they were, financially abusive, or had I known that they were lying and cheating and stealing and the verbal abuse and all of this, had I known that this is what was going on, no, I'm not attracted to that at all. So I guess what I'm saying is be open with how you're exploring all of this and try to identify patterns, but um, don't be too quick to just immediately assume, oh, this is why. Uh, I really feel more often than not, we are attracted to certain people and we keep certain people in our lives because we have a lot of unknown vulnerabilities at play, or we are trying to get our needs met, but those vulnerabilities are getting in the way and we don't realize it. So I hope that makes some sense. Yeah. And I just want to underscore what Kat's saying here too. She says, I agree. Having clear boundaries protects us from unhealthy people. Withdrawing from dating without working on boundaries only defers the repetition of old patterns and subsequent hurt. It really does. And that's a big shift for a lot of a lot of people in general, but especially survivors. When, if we have found ourselves, especially with a pattern of people that we are relieved to be away from, then there's an imbalance there with our boundaries, standards, and deal breakers that needs to be examined. And those patterns there's gaps in the knowledge, basically, is what it is. We all have them. It's just a matter of finding them. But if there's a pattern of behavior that's not working for you, and that's what it is that it's problematic people, then that's it. Spend time, boundaries, standards, deal breakers. The challenge with this is because we all are our own baseline for normal. I think most people, because if life is for the most part working for you, then most people think, hey, my boundaries are fine. I don't have the issue. My communication's fine. I don't have the issue. And it's a lot. And because of that, it gives us these blind spots to areas that are worth us examining. And because we see this other person's behavior, we're like, well, I shouldn't have to set boundaries with they should know that it's not okay to cuss me out or to stand me up or to cheat on me or whatever. And I agree. They should know that. And that we shouldn't have to explain the basics of adult behavior to another adult. But then it's worth examining, okay, well, why am I then? Why am I explaining the basics of adult behavior to another adult? Because you shouldn't have to. So why am I sticking around here? Where are my deal breakers in this? Where are my standards in this? And this is where a lot of people really struggle, because it's trying to figure out um, a lot of people struggle with wondering if their standards are too high, or if their expectations are too high, or um, all of that. It's just a process. It's a process to really examine our beliefs, I guess, and to get clear on what we want and what we don't want, and what we consider workable and what's not workable. Let's see here. Ooh, that's a powerful statement. Elizabeth says, yes, I don't medicate with relationships anymore. That is very insightful. Interesting. Let's see here. Yeah, Missouri Cowboy was just saying, Dana, the bouncing to extremes after each burn and then settling for some mix of the two toxic extremes and seeing it as balance. Well said. Yep. That's exactly the challenge that I've seen a lot of people, again, myself included, go through trying to find uh, kind of what's healthy or what's thinking, okay, well, maybe my expectations are too high, or this must be reasonable, or um, just not being clear on like, and so this is important that the measuring stick again for these relationships isn't, is this relationship better than the last one? Is this relationship healthy for me? Because better than the last one might just be a lateral move. If the last person was physically abusive and now this person's verbally abusive, okay, I guess it's better in the sense that it's not physical abuse, but it's verbal abuse, and that's damaging, but just in different ways. So using the measuring stick of what we've experienced before, which a lot of people subconsciously do. This goes back to the question about child abuse and or later on relationship abuse. For a lot of kids that have grown up in really dysfunction of any kind, uh, it's the feeling of, yeah, but I lived through worse, or I've known worse, or at least this person's not as bad as my mom or my dad. Uh, but that doesn't make their new partner healthy for them. So gauging the health of your relationship based on your past relationships isn't a good measuring stick. Okay. Hey, Gareth. Let's see here. Let me scroll up here. Okay, let's see here. Gareth says, "Hi, Dana. This is what I look like right now." Yeah. Has it been a long day? Uh, let's see here. That's a great point here. Who's saying that? Steffi says, I heard someone say after surviving a narcissistic relationship, we settle for something not as bad. So we go, I'm going to reverse that because I like the 1 being bad, 10 being good. We go from a 2 to, what would that be? The equivalent, 5, 6. But we need a 9 on the scale of healthy relationships. Yes. This was a, if we don't and that requires self-awareness. If we don't know what is nourishing for us and what is draining for us, we'll forever be struggling with how um, well suited certain relationships and situations are for us. Hi, Roman. Hold on, I got this little chihuahua crying at my feet. What's up, buddy? Come here. Come here. Oh, now you're gonna run away. Oh, now he's gonna run away. Okay. What? Oh, what? What? You want up? Do you want up? Oh, he's been doing this all days. I don't know. I don't know. I love you. I love you so much. What can I do for you? Come on up. Come here. Nope. Okay. Oh, let's see. What were you talking? Oh, the knowing what works for us. Roman, come here. Come here. Oh, you stinker. Oh, now he runs up. Okay. Knowing what works for us. If you might have heard me talk about this scale of, I don't know, satisfaction, I guess, from 1 being a hell no to 10 being a hell yes. Okay. 5 is you're lukewarm. When people starts kind of reconnecting to themselves and in being honest with themselves about how things really feel, discomfort or comfort, it's game changing for them. It's amazing how much of this we suppress on a regular basis across the board, not just with relationships, with everything. So one of the exercises that I encourage people to do is to start using this scale in ways that in areas that you don't have like the strong emotional investment. Perhaps starting with your kitchen. Okay. Going through and looking at different pots and pans or different dishes and ranking it on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you feel about this? I'm trying to think. Okay, this is an example I use all the time. I don't like regular ballpoint pens. I never really realized I didn't like them. But I really don't like them. It's the feeling of writing with a regular ballpoint pen is about the same as nails on a chalkboard to me. It makes me anxious. Like I really don't like it. So that experience is about a 2 or a 3 for me. I just didn't, it took me a while to realize that. I really enjoy writing with like these Pilot gel ink pens, G2 pens. Love it. This is an absolute 10 for me. I enjoy writing with these things so much. I always have one. Well, I shouldn't say always. 99% of the time I have one on me. I just love them so much. Little things. It's totally insignificant, right? But knowing how you feel about certain things, maybe certain fabrics, certain textures, certain fits. As I was doing this exercise, going through my closet, I realized I had all these button-down shirts. I hate button-down shirts. I don't know why. I guess I bought them because I felt like I should own them. Like that's what a professional wears, is a button-down shirt. They don't work for me. I am about 5'1" and I'm busty. They do not fit. They're not flattering on me. They don't fit properly. They're not my style. Nothing about a traditional button-down shirt works. No, there are very few exceptions, but by and large, the shirts I was buying were like a 1 or a 2, and I never wore them because of that. But I was in denial about that. We all have our favorite things, right? We all have our least favorite things. Where that insight starts to happen is, why do you have these least favorite things in your life? especially as an adult. If you're the one that went out and earned the money, why are you buying clothes that you don't like? Why are you buying why are you doing what you're doing? You know? Um, why are you having and then so using this uh you can use this exercise and I would encourage you to use it in a variety of ways. Open up your fridge, go through your fridge. What foods in there is a 1 and what is the 10? And is it a what is the number that you would assign to it in the moment? And then what is the number you would assign to it 10 minutes after you ate it? Because that can be interesting too. And then do this with things that there's more emotional investment in, such as friendships and family. What is this relationship for you on a scale of 1 to 10? It's really interesting when you realize, oh my gosh, you know what? I've considered this person my best friend for, um, I don't know, 20 years, but I don't like this person at all. And then you realize, oh my gosh, well, maybe I just have been friends with them because we were best friends in high school and we just kept being best friends. We have nothing in common. We disagree on almost everything. I always leave her company feeling irritated and frustrated and invalidated and on and on. And then you start realizing, oh my gosh, I have patterns of doing things. And then if things are going to change, and I need to be the one to change them. But then also when it comes to relationships, well, I guess with anything, knowing what makes something a 9 or a 10 for you. And then knowing if you settle for less than that, it's going to be dissatisfying. So there's and it's amazing how the world is a big place. And if we're focusing on qualities within people, looking for somebody who, I don't know, is interested in personal growth and who treats you with dignity and respect and who uh, understands assertive communication and who has these certain skills, and you just make that a must. When you practice this stuff for long enough, you just realize anything else is just not going to work. It's just not going to work. It's going to be a continual uphill struggle. And um, having it in terms of relationships, a person that really has that growth oriented mindset, who's open to personal growth, is vital. So it's not that a person has to have everything all figured out, right? It's they've at least got to be willing to be introspective and to grow as a person. So I hope that helps. Yeah, absolutely. Zachary is saying, I don't think I'll ever settle again. The minimum has to be dignity and respect. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's nothing there. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's uh, instant gratification. If there's not dignity and respect there, there's nothing of substance there otherwise. People often ask, how do you move forward? How do you let go? How do you, um, break the trauma bonds? These kinds of things. When you see that there's nothing there, when you fully, when you realize what substance is and what a lack of substance looks like, and that a lack of substance, there's a saying out there that crumbs don't keep a person fed; they keep a person starving. And when you can make that mindset shift to crumbs will just keep you starving, there's nothing there except ongoing frustration, it's a lot easier to walk away. Oh my gosh, my phone, hold on. Ah, I set my timer and now my phone, there it goes. Sorry about that. Okay, well, that would be an interesting exercise. Yeah, Elle says, well, perhaps we should rate ourselves every day. How proud and happy am I with myself today? And how can I change or improve that? Yeah, I mean, you could also add to that. I'm a really big fan of this, works well, especially with kids, really in anybody that's looking to implement change. And I think it works just as well with ourselves, is catching ourselves doing something right. Like with kids, catching them doing something right and then commenting specifics, oh, you did such a great job. Uh, yeah, studying for your science test. You were so focused and you did such a good job with planning your time. I'm just really impressed by that. Taking that same approach with yourself. You know, hey, these are my victories for today. Hey, I got up on time. I made it to work 10 minutes early. I, um, didn't, my ex texted me and I didn't allow myself to get completely sidetracked by that. Um, whatever your victories are, it can help to just acknowledge them. Let's see here. So, well, I guess the timer went off. Um, yeah, I guess that's a good note to end on, huh? Catching yourself doing things right. You could even run with that concept and create a whole journal that's just, you label that your success journal. And in it, you only document your successes. That could be an exercise, especially if anybody is really struggling with depression or um, just kind of noticing positives. If you're writing all of the positives down, and you could even kind of jumpstart this and go back and list out different successes that you've had over the years that you're proud of. You know, uh, maybe relationships that you ended, or how you handled certain events, or habits that you started or habits that you stopped. These kinds of things to just prove to yourself, you are capable, you are competent, you've done a lot of things right. It can help. So, okay. With that said, we'll do a short meditation here and call it a night. And then I will see you guys next week. Actually, real quick, that's a really fantastic question, Jennifer. I'm going to answer this question and then we'll do our guided meditation. So you guys take some time right now to find a comfortable position if you're and to just kind of relax into your breathing while I answer this. Her question is, can I ask though, if you only document your successes, then how can one learn? Very valid point. This exercise with having a success journal is more for proving to yourself that you're capable and competent. Um, and it can be more of like seeing, just seeing the successes in your life, especially for people that feel like um, that are really struggling with depression or anxiety or both, that nothing good is happening, that they're not capable, they're not competent. It can prove to yourself that yes, you are. So you could also dissect those successes and figure out, you could take it a step further and talk about lessons learned from those successes if you wanted to explore, if you wanted to just keep squeezing uh, you know personal growth out of this, you absolutely could. I think that would be, you I mean, you could keep going with that for sure. For sure. but there's a lot to be learned. There's always a lot. There's a lot to be learned from everything, you know. But the success journal exercise is more about kind of self-esteem building and confidence building and proving to yourself that you can and that you have before. But fantastic question. Fantastic question. Oh, shoot. Jennifer, you have just such great comments. Okay. She says, well, maybe that's part of my therapy problem. I tend to bring up problems from the week instead of my successes. That's what most people do. Okay. So this is another thing I would encourage you to talk to your therapist about, because a lot of people come into therapy thinking, I need to talk about what's wrong, because therapy is here to help get you quote unquote fixed. And this is what people do. They talk about what they think they should be talking about. And then they're just kind of winging it. So this is worth you talking to your therapist about, and exploring the thing, figuring out, hey, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to start examining X, Y, and Z, or sharing some of my wins, or whatever you feel that uh, would be kind of a good direction to bring that up and see what she has to say and get her feedback. So I really hope that you are able to have this conversation with your therapist. Um, and I'm excited for you. I hope you I don't know when you're going to see her next, but if you're comfortable sharing, if you do end up talking to her about that, I'd be curious to know how that went, and yeah, how that went. So keep us posted if you're comfortable. Steffi, real quick, says, thank you, Dana. Yeah, but don't you think most people go to therapy because they really want to feel better? Yes, absolutely. I think that is why they go to therapy, because they think that they want to feel better, but they don't know how to do it. And so then they talk about everything that's a potential problem. But if there's no structure or plan around that, then it just turns into a big kind of dumping session. So it's good to examine, okay, here's what happened, here's what there needs to be some structure to that for a person to get something out of it. And again, this is different types of therapy for different types of situations. You know, grief therapy is going to be very different than the person's going to have maybe not have any goals if they're really struggling with grief. Like they might just need to be heard and to talk, and that's okay. Versus a person who's having specific issues, their goal for therapy is they want to work on assertiveness skills. They want to work on, healing from childhood abuse. They want to explore what that even means to heal from childhood abuse, or what this means to heal from adult relationship abuse, or what have you. So getting clear with your whoever, the life coach, therapist, whoever is kind of figuring out like what's working for you, what's not working for you. It can help for to let them know what's worked for you in the past. If you've seen another person, like, oh, gosh, my old therapist, he or she used to give me homework. I found that really helpful. Or if you didn't, my old therapist used to give me homework and it really felt like a chore. I hated it. Like just letting them know like what works for you. That way they can they can they can work with you. I would say the vast majority of therapists, they're there because they really do want to help, and um, they enjoy helping clients transform their life. And the more you guys can work as a team, the more that goal can be achieved. So it's a win-win. Okay. Oh, there's so much being discussed in the chat. Okay, for real. We have to do the guided um, grounding meditation and then call it a night. So you guys take a moment, find a comfortable position, whether you're laying down or sitting down. Let's take a few deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. Allowing yourself to settle into this moment and to put aside all of the things that you might feel that you need to get done, or thinking about things that happened earlier today, setting all of that down, being as fully present in this moment as you can. Allowing each breath to travel deeper into the bases of your lungs, feeling your stomach rise and fall with each breath. Bringing your attention and that breath further down into your hips, feeling your whole torso rise and fall with each breath. Bringing your attention down to the tips of your toes, giving them a little bit of a wiggle. Bringing your attention down to the tips of your fingers and giving them a little bit of a wiggle. Turning your attention inward until you can feel your pulse. Feeling your heartbeat, perhaps even hearing your heartbeat in your ears. Taking a moment to just acknowledge what a magnificent thing the human body really is. How much is going on that we don't even have to think about. There's Your body is working 24/7 to heal and repair and grow. So many systems and processes in place. And what a wonderful thing that is. Now turning your attention to the temperature in the room, noticing if it's a little chilly or if it's a little warm or if it's just right. Now turning your attention to the feeling of the fabric around you, of what you're wearing, or if you're in bed, the blankets on your bed, and how that feels. If it feels soft or smooth, is it heavy or is it light? How do you feel with that fabric against your skin? Is it tight? Is it loose? Now bring your attention to what you smell in the room. Is it lingering smells from cooking that happened earlier? Is it the smell of an air freshener, some potpourri? Is it the smell of clean sheets? Is it the smell of dirty sheets? Is it the smell, if you're in an office or if you're in your car, is it the smell of the kind of commercial grade fabric? If you know what I'm talking about, that commercial grade carpet. Being fully present in your body. Being fully present in this moment and releasing the hold onto the past and releasing the grip onto the future. Just being here in the present moment and realizing that there is so much that is good and right with this present moment and with you. Taking some time right now to just acknowledge your journey so far and how much you've grown and how many of the good traits that you really do have. I can tell you right now, if you're here, then you're curious and you're introspective. You're interested in personal growth. Those are all really rare and wonderful, wonderful, precious gifts and traits. Not everybody has that. So take, um, I guess, just some acknowledgement of that, of there's so much that is good and right with you. There's so many strengths that you do have. And I'm sure, obviously, many, 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 many more than what I just listed. You guys are absolutely just, you're so strong. You're such warriors. And for you to have been through so much and to come here and support each other is restores my faith in humanity. It's just a beautiful thing to see. So acknowledge that, because it's rare. What you're doing here for each other is beyond awesome. And when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes and come on back. So, okay, guys, have a wonderful evening and rest of your week. And I will see you next Wednesday night, uh, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, as always, take care. Lots of love to you. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So, take care. Good night.